It was on a rainy evening in Surrey, when the sky was heavy with clouds, and the streets were glistening with the reflection of dim golden lamps, that Eleanor found herself staring out of the grand windows of the countryside estate she had moved into only a year earlier, her heart heavy with the weight of choices she had made and the silence of a house that echoed with too many unsaid things. And yet beneath that silence, something else had begun to stir, something forbidden, something that unsettled her at night and haunted her dreams when morning light arrived too quickly. Her marriage to Richard, a man older, stern, and ambitious, had been less of a partnership of hearts and more of an arrangement of convenience. And while he provided her security and the appearance of a family she had always longed for, his world was business trips, late-night calls, and an endless pursuit of wealth, leaving her with the hollow title of wife without the warmth of the husband. And it was in those lonely corridors that she found herself drawn, against reason and against morality, to the very two people she should have never even allowed her heart to think about: his sons, Christopher and Daniel, stepsons to her in title but men in their own right, each carrying the shadows of their mother's absence and the distance of a father who had never truly been present, their eyes holding both the ache of abandonment and the fire of youth. And as days turned to nights, and simple conversations at dinner stretched into moments charged with unspoken emotions, Eleanor felt something dangerously alive awaken within her, a yearning she tried to bury but which grew stronger each time she brushed past Christopher in the hallway or met Daniel's lingering gaze across the oak dining table. Christopher, the elder at 24, was composed, carrying the weight of responsibility like a shield, his voice calm, his smile reserved, but his eyes burned with a quiet intensity that unsettled her, while Daniel, barely 21, was reckless, charming, laughter always at the edge of his lips, a boy on the cusp of manhood who wore his vulnerability like a badge. And between the two of them, Eleanor felt torn, caught in a storm she could neither escape nor confess to anyone. And it all began one evening when Richard had once again gone to London for a week of meetings, leaving the house in her care, and she had wandered down into the drawing room to find Christopher by the fire, a book open in his hands, the golden light of the flames catching the sharp line of his jaw. And for a moment she froze at the sight, because he looked so much like his father, yet so unlike him, gentle where Richard was harsh, observant where Richard was dismissive, and when his eyes lifted to hers, lingering with something unspoken, she felt her breath falter, her excuse to leave lost on her lips as he asked her to sit, his tone polite but his gaze too steady. And as she sat, the fire crackling between them, silence grew into something heavy, until he spoke of his childhood, of his mother's absence, of the coldness of this house. And she listened, truly listened, her hand almost reaching to comfort him before she pulled it back, afraid of the fire in her veins. But then Daniel burst in, his laughter filling the room, his presence breaking the fragile moment. And he teased his brother, teased her, and yet beneath his playful words, his eyes held a daring glint, as if he too sensed the shifting air. And that night Eleanor could not sleep, her body restless, her mind betraying her with images she should not entertain, her heart torn between fear and a forbidden hope she could not name. The days that followed only deepened the dangerous path, with Christopher seeking her company in quiet, thoughtful moments, and Daniel finding excuses to draw her into his reckless joy. And though she tried to anchor herself in duty, to remind herself of vows and the weight of morality, she was drowning, caught in something far beyond her control, until that fateful night when rain lashed against the windows and power had gone out, leaving the house in shadows lit only by candles. And Daniel, emboldened by wine in the storm, had whispered words that shattered her defenses, telling her she was wasted on his father, that he saw the way she looked at Christopher, that maybe she wanted both, but was too afraid to admit it, and she had gasped, denying it, but her denial broke when Christopher stepped into the room. His expression unreadable, his eyes too knowing, and silence fell thick between the three of them until Eleanor, trembling, whispered that they must stop, that this was madness. Yet even as the words left her lips, her body betrayed her, leaning closer, aching for something forbidden. And when Christopher's hand brushed hers, grounding yet burning, she felt her world collapse into a choice she could never undo, for in that instant Daniel moved closer too, his breath hot against her ear, his voice daring her to admit what she wanted, and she broke, her heart tearing in the confession of desire she had buried too long. And what happened in that stormy night became the moment that would change everything, a secret tangled in shadows, in firelight and rain, a secret that no dawn could cleanse. And yet with the morning came the price, for Richard returned earlier than expected, suspicion already darkening his gaze, the atmosphere of the house shifting to a dangerous tension, and Eleanor, caught between guilt and defiance, tried to hide the truth, but truth has a way of bleeding through glances, of slipping out in unguarded moments. And Richard saw it in the way Christopher could not meet his eyes, in the way Daniel's laughter had become too sharp, in the way Eleanor flinched when he touched her, and rage grew in him like a storm waiting to break, until the night of the family dinner when he accused her outright, his voice thunder, his words venom, and though she denied, though tears filled her eyes, it was Daniel who stood, reckless as ever, confessing too much in his anger, and silence fell like a blade. Christopher closing his eyes in defeat, Eleanor gasping in horror, Richard's face twisting with betrayal, and what followed was chaos rage. Threats, shattered glass, a family torn apart not by strangers but by the forbidden fire that had consumed them from within. And in the aftermath, Eleanor found herself standing alone on the same balcony where she had once dreamed of love. Her heart broken, her soul scarred, her life forever changed, because love that begins in shadows cannot survive the light. And yet, even in her ruin, she knew she would never forget the storm that had awakened her, the fire that had burned her, and the two men who had shown her both heaven and hell in a single breath. And as the night sky stretched above her, vast and indifferent, she whispered to herself that some stories are not meant to be forgiven, not meant to be understood, but only to be lived once, fully, dangerously, beautifully, before being lost forever in the silence of memory.